Welcome to We Chat Divorce, hosted by Karen Shalou, Legal Liaison, and Katherine Shanahan, CDFA. Each episode, we sit down with divorce professionals and industry experts to provide insights and frank discussions about real people, real situations, and real divorce to help you achieve your best life post-divorce. This episode of We Chat Divorce is brought to you by My Divorce Solution, offering divorce financial planning so clients can secure the divorce settlement they deserve. Visit mydivorcesolution.com to request access.
Welcome to We Chat Divorce. Katherine and I are so happy today to welcome Attorney Jaime Davis. And our episode today is all about divorce without destruction, how to reach an amicable divorce resolution. Isn't that what everyone wants? In this episode, we're going to discuss how to approach your spouse to avoid destroying family finances, how to stay solution-oriented, and how to respond to and/or approach confrontational behavior. Like blaming, stonewalling, things like that, that is really prevalent in a divorce relationship. But first, let's meet Jaime. Jaime Davis is a board certified specialist in family law, as well as a certified family financial mediator and certified parenting coordinator. She supports all areas of family law, including complex equitable distribution and child custody cases, child support, post separation support, alimony, alienation of affection, and criminal conversation. And she also handles family law contracts such as premarital, postnuptial, and separation and property settlement agreements. Welcome, Jaime. That's a lot of things that you do during a day, week, or month.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we are too. I think this is going to be really good conversation that a lot of our audience can relate to. But first, Jaime, if we can just start with your story, if you can help us all know how did you come about your good work that you do today?
Well, I'd say I always wanted to be a lawyer for as long as I can remember. Definitely back in high school, certainly in college. But I went to law school thinking that I wanted to practice criminal law, actually. Really wasn't that familiar with family law. My parents are still been married, they're going on 50 years together. And so I really didn't have a lot of experience with divorce at the time. But I took one family law class at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and absolutely fell in love with it. And so from there, I took every family law class that the law school had to offer. And during my time in law school, I clerked for a personal injury law firm. I also clerked with an insurance defense firm. And I actually got a job offer to work at one of those firms. And I was like, this just isn't really sitting right. I think I want to look around a little bit more. And I saw an ad in the Lawyers Weekly newspaper, actually, the newspaper, not online back then. And it was for a family law position with, at the time, my firm was just Gaylor and Associates. And so had the interview, took the job, and I've been there ever since. It'll be 23 years in August.
That's awesome. So you have a lot of experience in what we're going to be talking about today, just kind of neutralizing all of those emotions so you can make really good, confident financial decisions. So let's just start in on the first topic here, how to approach your spouse to avoid destroying family finances. I know a lot of people are thinking about divorce or even discussing divorce. And a lot of times people go right into, the emotions and the separation without even knowing what they're walking into. So what do you tell people in that space?
Well, so I think it's really important to be mindful of how you initiate the separation because it's going to set the tone for the entire process. One thing I suggest to clients before they let the cat out of the bag, so to speak, and tell their spouse that they're interested in a divorce is that they consider couples counseling. Because, once you say those words, I want a separation, I want a divorce, it's really hard to take that back. And so I tell clients to be sure before they approach their spouse. I also think it's really important before you initiate the conversation with your spouse that you speak with an attorney. You don't necessarily have to hire the attorney at that point, but I think it's really important that people understand what their rights are and what they can expect if they decide to go through with the separation. It's also important to do some planning, gathering financial documents, things like that. Once you have the conversation with your spouse is very naturally going to become defensive, and documents that may exist in paper form at the house may disappear. Mail may start being diverted. A lot of stuff is online these days. And so the person may change passwords to various financial accounts. And so to the extent you can get your ducks in a row and get some of that financial information ahead of time, it's going to serve you well in the long run.
That's what I love about our process because that's exactly what we do. We have so many people that come to us that are thinking divorce. And even before they go have an attorney consult, it's really great to get all those ducks in a row so that your attorney is actually looking at what your marital estate could possibly look like and they can really direct you. It's also nice to get a little reality check of what life might look like if you do go through a divorce, because it will change. So being financially prepared is probably the best gift you'll give yourself so that you can have that tough conversation. And then, like you said, when you meet with the attorney first, you know what your legal rights are as well. And then you're not so emotional with your spouse because a little bit of knowledge gives you a lot of confidence.
Oh, absolutely. And, you don't want to have any surprises, right? Like, so sometimes we'll have folks come in for a consultation and they will say that they had an affair. And in North Carolina, if you're the dependent spouse, meaning the spouse who would otherwise be entitled to alimony or spousal support, if you have an affair, you are barred from seeking alimony. And so if you're a person who's on the fence about separation, and perhaps you were, a person who cheated in your marriage, you may want to know that fact before you start the separation process.
And since you brought that fact up, isn't it true that, well, isn't it, we saw this happen with a couple of people. Isn't it true that even if you're living separate or apart, that 1 year of separation, if you're that dependent spouse and you go on a date or you do start dating, you can't even do it within that year period. You have to wait until your divorce is final.
Well, so not necessarily. At least in North Carolina, evidence of marital misconduct that occurs after the legal separation, but before the divorce, can be used to corroborate misconduct that occurred during the marriage. But it can't be the end all be all. So, for example, let's say that you did not have an affair during your marriage, but after separation, you meet someone, you want to go on a date, provided you didn't know that person while you were married, it's going to be really hard for your spouse to try to prove that you were somehow having an affair with this person before the separation. I
Oh,
will
God.
say practically speaking though, dating can complicate things a lot. It can make cases more difficult to settle. Your spouse may get jealous and may not want to settle with you just because of that fact. They may resent your new life. And so, to the extent that dating relationships can be kept, private, that's best. I will give a word of caution though. In North Carolina, alimony will terminate if you cohabit with someone. And there are no hard and fast rules about what constitutes cohabitation. And cohabitation can look a lot like just a normal, regular adult dating relationship. And so you have to be very careful about overnight that you're spending with your new significant other to be sure that you don't do something to inadvertently end your alimony.
We always have clients who are upset that their spouse, who they're dependent on, is having an affair and it doesn't affect them at all. I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, technically, if you're the supporting spouse and you commit adultery, the statutes in North Carolina read that you shall pay alimony. And so they can be a little punitive in that regard. I think it seems a little unfair to folks because alimony really starts out as a financial analysis. Does somebody need support from the other person to pay their bills? And does the supporting spouse have enough money to pay that alimony to the dependent spouse, right? And so regardless of whether the supporting spouse cheated, if they make more money, they're most likely going to be paying alimony anyway. And so it can feel a little unfair in that regard, I think.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, and we might be diverting here, but if you don't mind, since you mentioned that, we do, the first step with us is we do your lifestyle analysis and your budget, right? How can you explain to people listening, and I know we're talking North Carolina here, how important it is to make sure that reporting of your income and expenses, the accuracy, because you are setting up what your need is. And we do need to see what the ability of the spouse is to pay. Some people just go in there and just write these numbers down because their attorney told them to fill something out. So when they come to us, we're like, don't submit anything until we could do the work with you because of the impact of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is no statutory formula in North Carolina for determining the amount of alimony, but where we start is that budget. And so that budget is absolutely critical to an alimony case. And you want to make sure it's done right. You want to make sure that you are, listing real numbers and that you have thought about all of the money that you spend. I mean, folks just forget about, certain expenses all the time. And so it's important to do a thorough analysis of your bank statements, your credit card statements, figure out where your money is going each month because, you're going to probably have those expenses moving forward after the separation. And you want to make sure that you have an ironclad financial affidavit that if you do find yourself in court, opposing counsel can't cross examine you on and find holes in it. So it's very important that those be accurate. And if you have to estimate stuff, that's okay. Sometimes we're changing houses and we don't necessarily know what certain expenses are going to be in the future. But if it's an estimate, it needs to be noted that it's an estimate. And that way you don't lose credibility that it's not based on actual past expenses.
Yeah. I'm the budget or one of the budget people here at MDS. And I often find people just don't necessarily understand their cash flow. So they'll either way overestimate or way underestimate, or they will say, well, I'm not going to be able to afford anything. So, I spend $10 a month on clothing. Well, is that your history? So we go through all of those exercises to your point so that what they're producing is underscored with a review of their spending habits. So that's really good for people to hear and know because a lot of times they don't get that feedback in the beginning and it can kind of backfire on them.
Karen hates when you put $500, $400, $700. Like,
Around numbers.
I want the exact amount.
Yeah,
I'm a
round numbers sound like an estimate.
Yeah. Well, it's so empowering. Typically people come on so nervous to do the income and expense call. And I always tell them, just remember how you're feeling right now. And at the end, you're going to feel completely different. You're going to feel in the know. You're going to feel empowered. It may take more than one session, but you're going to know this information and feel good about it. And more than that, know what to do about it or know what potentially you may have to do about it. So it is a good exercise, but nobody really wants to do it. I always love it, but most people don't want to do that. I want to circle back to something that you said in the beginning about therapy, because I think a lot of couples discuss the concept of therapy and go to therapy, and then they make these financial arrangements in the meantime. So, okay, we're going to go to therapy. Maybe we're in separate bedrooms or whatever it may be. And this is how we're going to pay expenses. And oftentimes they set themselves up in a space that's not really good for them financially in the meantime. So, I'll often say to them, let's hop on a phone on a call with your attorney to discuss, are you separated? When does your earned income become separate income versus marital income? What are the marital assets? What are your options? Even if you would reconsider and get back together, what is the financial agreement in the meantime? And I think that's a really important step for people to take just to start being educated as to what may be temporarily the situation and or long term. Do you find that to be true? And in North Carolina, often we'll ask people, what did your attorney say is the date of division of assets? They have no idea. So I think that's a really important knowledge base for people to have when they're approaching divorce.
Yeah, you've raised a great point. I mean, knowing whether or not you are legally separated in the state that you are living in is absolutely critical to your case. In North Carolina, to be legally separated, you have to be living under separate roofs with the intent of at least one of you that the separation be permanent. Living in separate bedrooms, you're not separated here. So knowing that is important because assets are valued as of your date of separation. It's like your marital estate freezes and the court takes a snapshot of everything that existed on that day. And so you need to know when that day was. Likewise with income. Income earned before the date of separation is marital and subject to division, but income earned after that date is the separate property of the spouse who earned it. So it is important to be mindful when making temporary financial arrangements that you know what your actual date of separation is and know whether or not you really are separated, right? Like if you're still living in the same house, but just in separate bedrooms, all that money is still marital. Like whatever little arrangement you've come up with that's informal, it doesn't really matter because everyone's income is still marital at that point. We do see cases where folks will do nesting with the children. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the kids stay in the house and the spouses cycle in and out for their custodial time. I think it can be a short-term stopgap type solution, but I am not a big fan of nesting on a long-term basis. I think it can be very cumbersome and confusing in terms of who is paying for what for the house. Really basic things like groceries, who's responsible for buying those, things
Mhm.
like that. So I think it can complicate things. But in those cases, technically the folks are separated, right? And so whatever day they started doing that, that's the date that the court is going to freeze the marital estate and value those assets.
We were I was on with a client last week, I think it was, and they're nesting. I'm not necessarily a fan, but I'm always asking our nesting clients, like, "How do you like it? What do you think?" Right? Just well, then this one case, she's like, I can't stand it anymore. He comes when he's a week on the house. He does his grocery shopping from the pantry because so I buy all the stuff, put it in the pantry, and he's leaving with grocery bags of what I just bought because she knows what the family likes. She's like, I'm over it. I said, that's kind of funny. He's pretty smart. He knows you buy the stuff he likes and you're doing it. So he's just, it's like when your kids go off to college, they come home and shop in your pantry.
Oh, yeah.
So true. And you know what? That just goes back to having financial agreements in place, whatever it may be. And it's just setting the pace for moving forward because if you're getting divorced and you have children, you're always going to need those financial agreements in place to be relied upon. So,
I just want to talk about that again. We're in every state and we're in a couple of different countries, our company. So, but I know you're in North Carolina. So if you're listening, Jamie is licensed in North Carolina. But, our southern states, this living separate and apart under different households, different roofs, it's so hard for them now with, rentals up so
Mhm.
high, interest rates so high. Our other states in the north, you can live together and be separated under the same roof because it obviously saves the family more money. Is there ever talk of changing that you're aware of? Because it just seems so prohibitive for couples to really put money aside to establish that second home.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I have not heard anything about changing that, but you're so right. I mean, with the interest rates and the rental rates, I mean, it can be cost prohibitive for couples to separate.
mhm,
Totally. It's sad, actually, the stress it puts on them.
absolutely. So that leads us into our next topic of confrontational behavior that would be by default in existence, if you're not able to separate, but, the marriage is struggling. So, how do you talk with your clients, Jamie, about this confrontational behavior between each other? And then I really like to talk about how it affects the children, young children, and your young adults. They often get just pulled right into the middle of it. And I think we as parents sometimes don't realize the long term effects of that.
Yeah, I think the primary thing to remember is to not engage. Separation and divorce is a very emotional time, very emotional process. And especially if you're dealing with a spouse who may have some sort of mental health issue for which they're not getting appropriate treatment, it can be even worse. Separation is just going to further exacerbate whatever issues were already, occurring in the marriage between the spouses. And so, to the extent that you just don't engage, if you have children, you're going to have to communicate with this person. You're going to have to try to co parent if you can. But when you communicate with them, probably easiest to do it in writing, text message, or there's lots of great apps out there now that you can use, like Our Family Wizard, where all of the communications about custody issues are in one place. And, odds are good you're going to get some message from your spouse or co parent that's not nice. And they're going to say really not nice things about you. And you're going to want to respond to those and you're going to want to defend yourself. But to the extent you can, one, just set the record straight if you need to do that. If there is inaccurate information in the marriage or in the message, excuse me, of course, set the record straight and point that out. But then keep your response brief to the point. If there's a question that needs to be answered, answer the question, but don't feel the need to get into the back and forth with your spouse. And especially when kids are involved, don't speak negatively about your child's other parent in front of them. They don't need to hear that. If people can keep their focus on what's in the best interest of the child, the process is going to be a lot easier for everyone. At the end of the day, your child is half you and half your child's other parent. And so when you're saying negative things about mom or dad, you're saying negative things about your child as well. And children should just be allowed to be children and to worry about when they need to go to soccer practice or what they have for homework or, when's their project due. They certainly don't need to be worried that they need to take care of mom or dad. That's another issue we see sometimes, that a parent may start to use the child as a confidant and the child starts to feel responsible for the emotional health of the parent. And that's not good for the child either. The children really should be left to be children and not in the middle of the adult issues.
So true and well said. Yeah, thanks for that.
Not easy to follow if you're listening. We totally get that, but try it. Just try to not engage.
Yeah. I remember my kids were really small, 7 and 5, actually, when I went through my divorce. And they would just be saying all kinds of terrible things about their dad. And I would start to join in. They would shut me down yesterday.
Mhm.
So I had to learn quickly that whatever their feelings were, mine didn't need to be applied to it. And it was shocking in the beginning. I'm thinking, well, wait, you just said all these things. But when I applied my opinion to it, then it became personal to them. And I had to go through a lot of counseling to understand that and, set myself apart and not and just have a different role in those conversations about understanding what they're saying, but not applying my own version or opinion or, you know, relationship issue into that topic. It was really eye opening for sure.
Yeah, I mean, those are the types of things. If you can talk to your counselor or talk to a girlfriend, of course, you're going to have strong opinions about the person that you're divorcing, but your kids are not the ones to share those opinions with.
That's so true. Yeah. So, lesson learned and we all move forward, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So, in divorce, compromise is key. And I think that that's what we're all talking about today, because that is how you reach an amicable divorce resolution. That what we do here every day is that divorce transaction. So, understanding what you have, understanding what that means to you, and creating division scenarios to understand the financial impact, because it is about compromise. And if you know the result of your decisions, you can make more informed decisions and have a better relationship moving forward. And so you say, Jamie, that nobody gets everything they want. And it's important to identify absolute necessities versus the desirable extras. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, One thing I tell my clients is there is no use fighting over something a judge couldn't do for you anyway, because if you guys don't reach an agreement, you're not going to get it. There is no other way for you to get this thing that you're fighting for. And so, why spend your time, your mental energy, and your money fighting over something a judge can't do for you? For example, we'll see folks who want to make their spouse agree to pay for college. Well, in North Carolina, there's no obligation for parents to pay for kids' college. And so we're like, you need to let that one go. It's just not going to happen for you if he says no. To the extent you can do some goal setting for yourself and figure out, all right, what are my big three? Like, if I walk away from this with these three things, I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to be ready to start this next chapter in my life, and let go of the little stuff. If it's replaceable, let it go. Had a case one time. I tell this story every now and again where we were in a very contentious mediation. We were trying to get this case settled, but the folks were just not seeing eye to eye on much of anything. But we were able to get all of the big financial accounts divided. They agreed on who was going to get the house. I think they might have had a vacation property. They agreed on that. It came down to a Dyson vacuum cleaner, and I am not kidding. These people would not let go of the vacuum cleaner. And so finally, I just looked at my client and I was like, let him have it. I will buy you a new vacuum cleaner. We will go to the store right after this and I will buy you a vacuum cleaner. And it took me saying that for her to kind of take a step back and realize, oh, wow, like I'm being silly. Like we've just divided millions of dollars of assets and here we are fighting over a vacuum cleaner.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to they just don't really want the divorce. They're so used
Right.
to coming at each other, right? And they're so you almost wake up ready for it and you're ready for, and so how do you break away from something you're trained on? So clearly if it's a Dyson, it's more of an emotional connection to that spouse that you just don't want to end in that moment.
Yeah, that's a
So
great
true.
point.
But I'm glad you said that because I would say turn to your attorney and ask him to buy you a Dyson. So you're my kind of an attorney. Thank you very much.
That's great. And you know what? That's circling all the way back to where we started this conversation, understanding what you have and understanding what is worth fighting for or not. And fighting, I guess, is an aggressive word, but understanding that transaction really can get you far down the road so that you're not feeling like you're giving up, the last thing you're hanging on to, a Dyson vacuum cleaner at the end, because you've already made peace with it. You already know the impact of that. So that's really good. Yeah.
Well, it really needs to be a business decision, right? Like you are spending money to potentially get money. And so there is no point in spending more money than you're going to get. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about child custody issues, we'd be having a different conversation, completely different. But when it comes to the money piece of a divorce, it truly does need to be a business decision. And you need to try to keep the emotion out of it to the extent you can.
You'll fare so much better. So you may have just said this, but what is your number one tip or piece of advice for someone going through a divorce? What do you want to leave everyone with today?
I really think it is crucial to prioritize your emotional health and your self care. There are lots of decisions that I can make for my clients. I can talk about different settlement scenarios with them, I can talk to them about going to court. But there are some decisions I just can't make for them, right? Like, I can't tell them which custody schedule is going to be best for their kids. I can't tell them whether or not they're willing to accept a certain settlement proposal. And so I need them to be emotionally healthy so that they can help me through this process. I need them to be in a place emotionally and mentally where they can make really good decisions, because the decisions you make when you are resolving your family law issues, these decisions are going to affect you for potentially the rest of your life. I mean, these are going to be the assets that you have to live on. This is going to be the amount of support that you're going to have to pay your bills. And so I always encourage my clients to, if you don't have a therapist, get one. If you don't want to go that route, then do whatever it is that you do for self-care, whether it's exercise, whether it's going out with friends, whatever your thing is. Just really make sure that you lean into self-care so that you can make good decisions throughout the process.
That's excellent. And I'm going to add to that and get your MDS financial portrait so that you can so you can be at the table with your attorney making those really good decisions. So, Jamie, how can our listeners find you and learn more about you?
Well, I host a podcast as well. It's called A Year and a Day, Divorce Without Destruction. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. I work at Gaylor Hunt, Davis, Taylor, and Gibbs. It's a law firm here in Raleigh. Our law firm website is divorcestough.com, so you can find me there. And I am on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Jaime H. Davis Attorney.
Excellent. This concludes our discussion on divorce without destruction, how to reach an amicable divorce resolution. Thank you, Jaime, so much for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of We Chat Divorce. We hope this episode was informative and supportive on your divorce journey. If you're looking for more support for navigating divorce with confidence and clarity, head over to mydivorcesolution.com for more podcast episodes, divorce events, and resources for your divorce. We'll see you back here for our next episode.